Hey there, we're glad to have you in the smoke-filled room. We're excited. This is our 16th episode, and as my team pointed out, since Lincoln is a big part of our brand, this is the Abe Lincoln episode, is the 16th episode, so we're excited about that. Though, which of you said on the 21st episode we should go more towards amendments and everyone have a drink for the 21st episode? Was that you, Michael?
Yeah, we should all be doing it from our cars this week. That'd be perfect since we're 16 now.
Yeah, I think the Abe Lincoln tie-in works a little better. But
All right.
You've already heard from Michael, who's with us today. We got John Gieske, who's at his girlfriend's grandmother's house, we hear. So the question is, are you going to have some meatloaf? Are there some giant Jesus figurines somewhere? Does she collect porcelain dolls? Like, what's the, what do we got behind you? Anything fun?
We got some Easter decorations out. We got a flower painting. Those like white angels that are like maybe
every grandma has those.
Yep, got some of those, and got a fridge.
Okay, yeah, I feel like it's typical grandma's house if there's Easter decorations out at the end of August, so that makes sense.
We're gonna have to do like MTV Cribs and just kind of do a lap around later.
I feel like that would work. We got Matt, Chris, and Abby with us as well. Matt and Chris aren't doing anything overly interesting, but Abby's outside today, it looks like.
Yeah, this is my backyard. I've got the camera angled so you can't see how poorly landscaped it is. So this is the one good shot of my backyard.
All right, well, that works. We're glad to have everybody with us. This is our pre-Labor Day episode, and I'd like to say to those of you who are maybe thinking about skipping this episode because it's going into a holiday, that we don't have a lot to cover. We don't have a lot of major things to cover, and that's what I assumed it would be like when I started to pull together the agenda with our team. And now I'm looking at the agenda going, yeah, this is a packed episode. There is a lot going on. So whether you watch this on Friday when we release it, or over the holiday weekend, or even next Tuesday when things start up, there's a lot we need to get to. So strongly encourage you guys to check out this episode. We're going to get right to it. The biggest campaign news of the week has led to a discussion amongst our team. So before we get into the campaign update, I want to start with that discussion, which is, why are so many Illinois Republican legislators retiring? Because we have yet another one that we're going to announce to you in our next topic. But before we do that, I just want to open it up to this discussion of why are so many retiring and choosing not to run in 24, and in some cases 26, but most of these are 24. What are your thoughts on that? What are you guys hearing?
So I'll start. One of the things about being a Republican state legislator in this state is that, well, you're in a super duper minority, so there's not really much you can do anymore. The other thing is driving down to Springfield sucks. A lot of people don't like driving down to Springfield. I know myself, when, our good producer Lane Davis was my chauffeur for the week. Driving down to Springfield's a very depressing drive. Not really much to look at other than corns and farms. God bless our farmers, but it's not really an enjoyable ride to do. So that can take a lot out of you after a number of years. So it's not surprising to me that people are jumping boat, because again, if you're given the choice of driving down to Springfield and not driving down to Springfield, most people pick I'm not going to drive down to Springfield.
Well, I think your point, Chris.
Go ahead, Abby.
I feel like I'm always interrupting Butler, but it's kind of a theme now. But I think like to your point about Springfield, I hear all the time, they're like, why would I want to go on this really long drive, especially when you live in the collar counties and you're going to be in the super minority and you're really going to have to be that one to blaze the trail. And there's not a lot of people, I think, that have the stomach for that long term. Like, we see that when we're recruiting candidates. Like, why would I want to do that? That sounds horrible. I mean, and also, I think we talk about this all the time in the office, like, what type of support are these candidates really get when they're running for office? It's not, the infrastructure hasn't been what it needs to be. So, I mean, it's not surprising that some of these folks are getting burnt out.
Here's the thing. People get involved in politics for the same reason that I'm sure all of us did. They want to make a difference. They're tired of just sitting on their couch watching the news, complaining. They want to actually go do something and do something productive. But then we hear time and time again that when people actually get elected to office, they have their hands tied behind their back, and how much difference can they actually make? So in my conversations with legislators down in Springfield, they're like, you know what? I fought the good fight. I tried to make a difference, but at the end of the day, what's the point if we're not moving the needle as far as they think that they can be? So it's depressing, but I also think that people just serve their time and they want to be done, and you can't really blame them.
I would say another factor that is kind of new over the course of the last, like, 2 years or so with the redistricting. A lot of these state reps and state senators, the district makeup changed significantly. And some of them had like a much more compact district before, and now they're, covering multiple counties and, partial counties. And, we have some members that have as many as 12 counties that they're representing as a state senator. And that's like a lot of time on the road. And it's a lot of time away from family and those kind of things. And I think that's a factor as well. Like, we've heard some of the members that have chosen to retire, like, make comments of that nature that, it's that some of these districts are just massive. And that's new. I mean, it's more significant now than it has been. And I think that's a combination of like shifts in population throughout the state. But I also think that you could make an argument that the Democrats chose to do that to some of our downstate members, because whenever those same seats were represented by Democrats, they made sure that, it was a 1 or 2 county district. And now some of these members have got, 6, 7, 12 counties, which is insane.
I mean, I think your point is valid about the size. I don't know that I'd give Democrats that kind of credit that they purposely made these districts big just to annoy the Republicans and make it more difficult. They just packed as many Republican voters as they could into these districts. And as a result, they became extremely rural. So I think a lot of times we can assume the other side is maybe smarter than they are. And I don't know how you add that as a qualification when you're drawing districts to say that we're going to use district size to try to drive these Republican nuts. But it doesn't change your point that the size of the district is definitely coming into play here. John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think district size, is kind of a good transition into, one of the retirements that we've talked about, if that's okay. I mean,
no, but before you do that, let's stay on topic. So, like, why are these representatives choosing to retire? I assumed you'd be the one to bring up that some of them just don't want to be in the ballot in 24 because of who they're going to have to be in the ballot with. I mean, come on, stay true to your brand and talk about that.
I mean, like, that's not going to be my argument, because a lot of these retirements, they're coming from downstate where, Trump being on the top of the ticket, it isn't a big deal to you. I mean, like, it's not going to hurt you in Tom Bennett's state Senate district. It's not going to hurt you in Wynn Stoller. I mean, the only district where the Trump factor really comes into play is potentially Mike Marin's district. But other than that, I mean, these are safe Republican seats that, legislators are just, tired of being in. So I think there's just a myriad of different reasons for why people are retiring. You're kind of seeing that each legislator has their own individual ones. But, we haven't really seen any suburban reps say I'm not running again. And,
well, there aren't very many suburban reps, so there's nobody to retire.
Yeah. So,
well, but what about Agofsky? I think Agofsky's the only one really that's kind of on the fence right now in the suburbs. But again, we don't have a lot of Republicans up here.
Well, that goes into the whole, mayor legislator overlap thing, because he's both mayor of Lamont and state representative. If you're the mayor of a town and you're also state representative, some people can do that. Some people like doing that. Other people, they'll pick one over the other. Anthony DeLuca, he picked being state representative over being mayor of Chicago Heights like 20 or so years ago. Most people, on the other hand, they prefer to be mayor because they get to go in a few mile radius as opposed to driving down to Springfield or even their whole district they got to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, and being mayor is an executive position where you have a lot more authority. Being a legislator, you're one of, however many it might be, 118 or 59. And so you have a lot less authority and power. I mean, here's the two things I'll say, and then we'll move on from this topic. Number one, sometimes change is needed. Unfortunately, in the retirement, the couple of retirements that we're talking about previously in this next one, people haven't been in office for very long. But in general, changing the guard isn't always the worst thing. Getting new blood in there, getting new energy in there. So in general, it's not necessarily the worst thing, but there is a trend here. And these aren't people who have been in office for a very, very long time who are stepping away. So the trend to me is a little scary. And I don't know that we've gotten fully to the bottom of why it's happening, but it is definitely something we should be keeping an eye on. Here's the good news I would share. Many of the people that I've talked to who have retired, even over the last decade, good, solid Republicans, good, solid conservatives, have told me flat out they're not done. They can't serve in office anymore for various reasons, but they're not done fighting the fight, and they mean it. Everyone says that, but these people actually mean it. And what I've seen is that they do still fight behind the scenes. They do still talk about potentially maybe running for office again in the future. They just couldn't do it right now. And in many cases, it was because of the Trump factor, especially out in the suburbs. There's a lot of Republicans who knew based on the Trump factor they could just never win again until Trump was gone. But it doesn't mean they're done fighting for the cause. They're fighting behind the scenes. There just was no point in losing by 15 points in the next election. So I do think that while we are losing some of these good legislators and good elected officials, many of them I'm seeing stay in the game. And I think as we start to turn this around in Illinois, if we start to turn this around in Illinois, my hope is and my belief is that many will come back. So I don't look at this as, huge long-term negative for the party and for us. We're taking some hits, obviously, but if we can start to turn things around, I do think a lot of these people will come back and we'll have some reinforcements. All right,
Well, I
as
think
John
what the
tried to
concern
do,
is.
close
Well,
us out, Alan.
Yep. I was just going to say, I think the only concern out of all of this is that it's 2024. And I think with Trump likely at the top of the ticket, the concern is that, we're already anticipating holding the line rather than gaining seats. So now we're, turning our attention to some of these seats that we thought were kind of, on autopilot. So I think maybe that causes a little concern, but again, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, listen, this isn't the greatest news for 2024, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, we hinted at it. Let's talk about it. It was reported first by Patrick Finkston of the Illinois that Wynn Stoller in Senate District 37 is not running for re-election. So this opens up a Republican seat that wasn't open before. As I mentioned, Wynn Stoller has only been in for what I believe is one term. It was a big fight. There are two factions that if we have time, we can get into that tend to fight in that Peoria area. So it was a hard fought battle getting Stoller in there in the first place. And now he's not running for re-election. So there's questions over, as we said, why is he not running? He mentioned the size of the district, and he's not wrong. If you look at the map of the district, actually, Finkston put out a map, so we'll ask Lane in post to bring that up, where it shows where he lives down in Peoria and how massive that district is. It goes over basically to Davenport and the Northwest, goes all the way north to Dixon. It's a massive district. And so that makes perfect sense to me. But now we've got an open seat, so we're talking about who's running for that seat. So what are your guys' thoughts about Senate District 37?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting to see, Wynn Stoller retire, considering, he just ran for, re-election. He had a really tough primary last cycle that he barely won by it was 500 votes or so. But yeah, he put out the size of his district is, a big deal. And it's a fair point. I'm sitting in his district right now and I'm an hour and 50 minutes from Peoria. It's a lot for him to cover. He cited family concerns. But I think the other side of it is who's going to replace him. This is a safe Republican seat. These don't come open, as often as, some would think. So I think you're going to see a really competitive primary from people down in the Peoria area over to the Quad Cities. It goes all the way over to DeKalb County, Dixon. So I think a lot of candidates are going to jump into this race, and it's going to be something, similar to what I've talked about for Senate District 53, where it's going to be about what candidate can establish, a geographical base and start expanding out from there.
Yeah, just to bring emphasis to your point, it's according to our baseline, it's a plus 23 district for Republicans. So I don't see Democrats necessarily making a play for this, but it does mean that we're going to spend resources in a competitive primary. So it's still going to cost some resources.
Well, one of the names that we've heard and that Patrick Finkston mentioned in his piece on this earlier, a day or two ago, or whenever that came out, was Tom Dimmer, who was a member of the state house, ran statewide for treasurer, young guy, very popular among Republicans, and has a lot of cash on hand if you look at state board of elections. So he could be a great candidate, and it would be awesome to have him back in the General Assembly because he brings a lot to the table.
Yeah, the two reps in that district are Ryan Spain and Dan Swanson. If I'm getting it right, I hope I'm getting it right. So
it's Ryan Spain and Brad Fitz.
Brad Fitz. Okay. So yeah, you're right. It's Brad Fitz. So, I mean, Spain is in leadership in the House Republicans. Yeah, you're right. I don't know why this link was coming up as Swanson for 74. I mean, Fritz is in there. Just took office, younger guy. I don't know how ambitious he is to want to maybe move up further. He had a challenge primary. I know the mayor of Dixon was in that race, so maybe if one of those looks to go up. I don't see Spain doing it. I mean, he's in leadership in the House, so I don't see him doing it. As you mentioned, Demmer's a name that's getting around. There's definitely some names looking at it, but I think John's point is accurate. It's such a large geographical area that I'd have to imagine we're going to see a bunch of names come out. I mean, somebody like a Demmer could clear the field pretty quickly, both with his experience and with his cash on hand advantage. But I think you're going to see a lot of people float their names. And with petitions starting next week, you're going to hear these names start coming out pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean, Demmer won that district in the general election by 26 points. He overperformed, other Republicans running statewide. So he's got a really good base of support there. And like Michael said, he's sitting about $300,000. But, another thing to note that if, Demmer's to get in this race, I mean, he is tied to that slate of Richard Irvin. And, we've seen how popular people tied to that slate were in a primary electorate. The electorate is shifting much more conservative. Well, was a great state representative. He'd be a fantastic state senator. If he gets a challenge from his right, having $300,000, still doesn't mean you're going to guarantee a win there.
Maybe that's a reason that he didn't want re-election. I mean, if you are an incumbent Republican and you have a primary and it's not just some random person, but a person who gets almost 49% of the vote, is maybe he's anticipating that happens again. And with the electorate changing and the political dynamic changing, why would you want to go against that again if your own party doesn't even support you enough that you have to put up a competitive primary? So
yeah, it'll be interesting, and I think the point's valid. Demmer is a solid conservative, but he'll be tied to Irvin, he'll be tied to Ronner, he'll be tied to all the tactics of that world, and grassroots, especially the conservative grassroots, aren't happy about that. We still hear people talking about Irvin in that campaign constantly. So Demmer will have to deal with that, and despite the fact that he's a solid conservative, ask Jason Plummer and Mike Bost how far that gets you when somebody wants to challenge you from the right in 2024. So we'll have to see what happens in this race. All right, let's move to the next topic. As I said, we got a lot to cover, and let's get through it. Oliver, I know you're hearing some changes and some rumblings, possibly about House District 82, that a candidate who was previously thought to be looking at IL6 is now actually potentially looking for House District 82. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so we would talk about Illinois 6th Congressional District, and we saw Gary Grasso. We heard he was going to take a run at that seat again. Now I'm hearing that maybe he's looking at House District 82, which we know is where Agofsky currently is. Chris and I have been talking a little bit, and maybe he'll get into this a little bit, but it might be just a bad game of telephone. But, when someone says House, they think one thing, and then someone thinks the other, and then so on and so forth. But I only think the only reason this rumor even has credence is the fact that Agofsky's been sitting on the fence about running for so long. I think this wouldn't even be a conversation if we knew Agofsky was in, and he still hasn't made a decision. And again, petitions are being passed, in less than a week. So who knows? It would be hard to tell.
Yeah, that's a Republican district. I mean, if you're Grasso, I mean, the 6th is appealing because it's maybe possibly in play, and I'm sure it smarts that he lost the primary last time, and he'd like to overcome that. But then if 82 does indeed open up, if Agofsky isn't going to run, I mean, that's a solid Republican district. So I feel like anybody in that district will be looking at possibly going for it.
Yeah, I mean, and we've heard Nicola Haas. So well, either way, he'd be in primary for him. So it's going to require work, even if it's a Republican, Republican area. So we'll see.
Frankly,
Chris, what are your thoughts on that district?
I mean, just going into the primary point here for a second. Frankly, I think he might have an easier time getting through the 6th Congressional District's primary than he would getting through the 82nd District's House primary. Because, like Abby said, Nicole Haas from Homer Glen's been looking at that seat. There are some people in Lyons Township who have looked at that seat. So, and I'm sure other people in DuPage County probably look at that seat too. So, I mean, he might have a harder time getting through a primary for state rep than he would getting through one for Congress. I mean, right now, Gary Grasso was the biggest name who was, circulating their name around for Congress, and he'd probably win that primary outright, barring another, major candidate, major money jumping in that race. If I had to guess, I would agree with Oliver. This is probably just a game of telephone. One person says house, it means one thing. Another person says house, it means a completely different thing. But he might know something we don't. Maybe Agofsky made up his mind. He called Gary and said, Gary, I ain't running. You can run. And that might be the case. But we'll have to wait and see until these petitions get passed.
So it's pure stiff speculation at this point. I mean, I'd be curious if this is the way it does indeed play out. Durkin endorsed Grasso in the congressional primary 2 years ago. And those two have a relationship from Grasso being mayor within Durkin's district. So the question will be, what does Durkin do? Because obviously he'll have some, probably some interest in what happens in 82. So that's something I would watch pretty closely if Agofsky does not run.
Tactically, it seems like we all know that Gary obviously is looking at the 6th at some point in time, but it seems tactically and strategically that it would make more sense for him to run in this House seat, which he probably has a better chance of winning. He could, get his name out there a little more, gather resources, and it'll be hard to win in the 6th, especially in a presidential year. So why not run for House, build up your bona fides and your credibility there, and then in 2 years or 4 years run for the 6th? That would just be my take.
I get the math, but I think Chris's point, basically what you're saying is, do you get to the general or do you not? Because right now, with who's announced for the 6th, Grasso is the front runner. And we'll see who else comes out. Meanwhile, in that House district, HRO has a very specific profile that they look for in a candidate, and Gary doesn't match that profile. So I would imagine HRO would be heavily recruiting and would not be initially looking at a Grasso. They'd be looking at someone else, and they've shown willingness to put their resources behind other candidates or behind their candidates, even if it's a challenge primary. So the question would be, do you run in a House district primary where the primary is going to be a lot harder, but if you win, you got a good chance of actually winning the general, or do you at least go in the 6th where you'll make it all the way to November, most likely, and then we'll see what happens in November. I think that's the question. Do you guarantee a win in March, but maybe lose in November, or do you maybe lose in March and then you're just done?
I would take the former any day, but that's just me.
And to the other point, the other point you made here, DeRay, the idea of you run for something and you run for something else long term, that's great. But Gary already has name ID. He's already ran for Congress in a Republican primary. He's already ran for Attorney General of the state. So it's not like he needs to build up
and county board and of course mayor.
Well,
yeah, right. So there's not really a reason for him to launch a type of long-term plan that I'm going to do this now and then that. It doesn't make sense for somebody like that.
But he lost is what I'm saying. So name ID can be a thing, but if you keep running and losing, I'd much rather lose a primary and have more of a chance of not being labeled as a loser than running for the 6th again and then, okay, he lost. Then you're just looking like a Jim Overwise.
Well, I mean, I think you're talking about dancing on the edge of Jim Overwise territory. Does run for office very frequently. I think we could say that based on the facts. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But as Chris said, it's conjecture right now. As Oliver said, it's conjecture. So we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll keep our watchers and listeners posted. All right, Michael, you've got like 4 different things here. Let's see if we can breeze through these in record times. We can get to some other topics. But I know you've got a report from House District 107 where Marsha Webb is primarying Brad Halbrook, and were some interesting developments there.
Yeah, so Brad was kind of slow to make a decision on whether or not he was running for re-election. So that created an opening for Marsha Webb. She announced that she was running before Brad had and was kind of courting people and trying to rack up some support and some endorsements. And obviously that's led to some tension in that region. Congresswoman Mary Miller is supporting Brad Halbrook. There's some other people that are kind of on the fence or like feeling the pressure from, precinct committeemen and other people that are active in that region. And you've also got a little bit of overlap between the Bost and Bailey primary because there are some shared voters there. So that is definitely going to be a race to watch, and it's going to be interesting to see how that develops for sure.
I'm just quickly looking through my list to see what is the most Republican House district in the state of Illinois based on our baseline, and it looks like it's House District 107. I mean, but it's a R50 in our baseline, and I'm seeing R49, I think. I did this on the fly, so don't take it to the bank. But from what I'm seeing, it is literally the most Republican district in the entire state is represented currently by Halbrook, and he's being challenged by Marsha Webb. So clearly no general election here, but you'd imagine a district that's that Republican, you're going to be talking about which candidate can run further to the conservative base.
Absolutely.
All right.
Go ahead.
Is it on 107 or are we going to the next topic?
I was going to go to the next one.
All right, let me change topics, man. You and John keep trying to do my job for me. I got one job here. All right, let's talk about 114 because I know we've talked about Schmidt and 114 being one of the most targeted races by Democrats in the House. And unfortunately, Schmidt hadn't really been doing a strong fundraising, but you've got a new report on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So since the last time we talked about this, obviously Latoya Greenwood is running against him. That's who he successfully defeated in 2022. So it's kind of a rematch, just like the presidential one may be. Some people had some concerns on fundraising, but over the course of the past couple of weeks, he has had some A1s, which is really good to see, some transfers, mostly transfers, but still a positive development. He's got a fundraiser this evening and at the Grizzlies ball game, $120 a person, and hopefully racks up a lot of money there. And then he also has a fundraiser in September, kind of a smaller dollar one. So he's really starting to crank it up and fire on all cylinders, which is something that we really like to see, especially since he's my state rep.
Well, I mean, listen, that region has been good to us due to the work of a lot of the grassroots people there. And Schmidt overperformed by about 8% last election. So he's no slouch. Now, I wouldn't say that was all him. There was a lot of grassroots work, and Greenwood running a pretty poor race. There's a lot of factors that went into that, but it is a region that we've shown we know how to win as Republicans. So if he gets his act together on fundraising, we hopefully should be able to hold our ground there. So it's great to hear that he's starting to ramp that up.
Absolutely. And it could be a game changer for St. Clair County long term if he continues to win and put up bigger margins. That'll allow us to kind of push some other people across the finish line, I would say.
Yeah. All right, let's move to the next one. We talk about Bost every week, and I was really hopeful this would be 1 week. We don't have to talk about Darren Bailey or Mike Bost, but you have a quick update on it. So let's do a quick update, and then let's try to see if we can keep this from being another Bost Bailey episode.
Yeah, that's fine. So last week we had the GT Thompson. He's the chairman of the Ag Committee was here. Charlie Meier hosted an event and had farmers from all over the region there. Really good turnout. And there was a local CBS affiliate that did an interview with Charlie after that event was over, about 5 minutes. So pretty lengthy. And Charlie came out strong for Mike in that interview and really outlined, why he's supporting him and why we need to keep Mike in Congress. So if you guys, look it up and watch it. It's a worthwhile watch.
Okay. I mean, Charlie Meier is pretty well liked in his district and in that region. So it's not an insignificant endorsement of Bost. So it's definitely notable. All right. I know the last update you have, and I'm sure a few other people might have thoughts on this, is just you've heard HRO starting to staff up for 2024 and get their ducks in a row to be ready for the next round of elections.
Absolutely. So they hired Colin Pruitt, who I know is familiar to a lot of people on this podcast, and also people that are involved in politics. He's a great guy, really hardworking. He worked on Rodney Davis's campaign 2 cycles. He was very helpful to us on Vote No on the progressive tax, and has just kind of been a rock star the last couple of cycles. So that's really encouraging to see. He's going to be overseeing a lot of the petition work in the short term, and is also actively looking for folks to staff some of these regions where we have pickup opportunities or races where, Republicans have to fight to keep it. So we're starting to see some movement there, and it's very positive. So I'm real glad.
Yeah, he's a good guy, and he's got a track record. So certainly a positive development there for HRO as they staff up. And didn't you say, I thought you had someone was in comms over there that was a little surprising. Who'd you hear was also over there?
Avery Bourne is doing some communications work for HRO as well. So that's also, I think, a positive development. Young brings a good perspective, and she knows a lot of that inside baseball and what it is like to be a member of the House, which is a solid quality.
It's an interesting hire. We'll see how it works out. I'll leave it at that. Seems like an interesting choice there, but we'll see how it plays out. We certainly wish these people nothing but the best. All right, last Illinois campaign update. Mike Coffey in House District 95, who was recently appointed in the Springfield area. He now has a primary challenger in Kelvin, Coburn. I don't know that any of us have too many details on that, just that we've heard the news. Anyone have anything you've heard about that primary challenge?
There was a lot of people that applied for this appointment. I think it was like maybe as many as 18. And obviously they chose to go with Mike Coffey. So it was kind of expected that, one of those other 17 individuals would do this. So it's not a surprise. But we'll see where it goes.
Okay. It's a fairly solid Republican district, 11% positive for us. Even some of our lower performing candidates still won by 5 or 6% in that district. So doesn't look like it's necessarily in play for the Democrats unless we do something real stupid in the primary. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But based on who's backing whom in that race, it certainly seems like Coffey is sticking with Coffey is the right play.
There is so many clever fundraising things you could do there, like buy Mike coffee, and then he's holding a mug or something, or coffee with coffee. It'd be a missed opportunity if you didn't do it. So he better.
I mean, it's kind of like the White Sox not using Jake Berger's name in their promotions.
Exactly.
Like Mike Coffey not giving out coffee mugs and doing coffee related events would just be a travesty. So, all right. Let's talk, not a lot, but let's talk a little bit about presidential stuff because Core Strategies released a poll this week. If you haven't seen it, be sure to check it out. You can get the analysis it's in our YouTube channel. So if you're watching this, you're already in the channel. Look for our live from the Lincoln desk section and you'll see the results that we released. We go in depth on the results, and I don't want to necessarily do that here, but our political team was only able to join us in chat during that discussion. So we promised we'd give them a chance to jump in with their thoughts here in the smoke-filled room episode. That survey showed, no surprise, Biden and Trump are both holding sizable leads. 81% of Democrats are sticking with Biden. 53% of Republicans at the moment are sticking with Trump, which is he's overperforming number two by right now. By 43 points. So Chris's point about how it seems fairly inevitable is at the moment still looking semi-accurate. I'm going to use the word semi there. I'm going to use the word semi just because I need to be able to sleep tonight. All right, leave me alone. Let me live in my la la land. But here's where it got interesting. So we asked if Trump was not in the race, who would you support? Just so we can start to see where the people's second choice is going. DeSantis was at 26%. Vivek was second at 16%. Then you saw Pence and Haley at 10%. So we see Haley making a big jump there. And then Tim Scott coming in at 9%. One other interesting tidbit there was we pulled out those who chose Trump initially and saw who did they choose in that second question. So we just looked at that 53% who chose Trump. And we said, where did they go when we removed Trump? And what you saw is that they kind of hold it against DeSantis and Ramaswamy right now for running against Trump because both of those actually dropped with that subset. Meanwhile, Pence jumps up to 15%, Haley to 14%, Scott to 12%, Christie to 11%. I kind of found it ironic that Trump supporters aren't holding it against Christie, but they are holding it against DeSantis and Vivek, which is pretty funny to me. So anyways, we're seeing some movement there. What's the headline? The headline is Trump's still in the lead by plenty. DeSantis seems to be faltering and losing some ground. And looks like Haley and Ramaswamy are starting to come up here as potential alternatives to DeSantis. Meanwhile, Chris Christie's kind of on the edge, looking in. That's what we're seeing in this poll. What do you guys see? What stood out to you? And let's say Chris has to go last so we don't have to listen to how inevitable Trump is.
I had no intention of going.
Well, I think what stood out to me is that when you pulled Trump out of that and people had to choose, DeSantis's numbers are still not particularly strong. I think going into this, we thought he's like going to be the alternative that's going to be able to beat Trump. But even without him on the ballot, people are not seeming to be very enthusiastic. So I think if you're a DeSantis supporter, you should be a little concerned.
I mean, national polls, just so we give some national perspective here. Over the last month or so, Trump has lost about 3 or 4 points. Now, 3 or 4 when your lead is like 40 is fairly insignificant, but Trump has lost a little bit of support. DeSantis was losing ground fast, And then the debate seemed to stabilize him a little bit. If you look at the polls since the debate, it seems like he's sort of, he at least stopped the downward trend, but he didn't start going back up. And in the meantime, you're seeing Vivek jump significantly up. You're seeing Haley start to jump significantly up. And even Chris Christie is starting to kind of trend upward. So you are seeing, as we have been saying, voters are going to start to date some of these other options until the race becomes real in January. And we're starting to see that play out.
Well, I think you're going to see that 45% that is not supporting Trump, they're just kind of going to play musical chairs a little bit, try some candidates out. And as candidates drop out, like we had our first one already, and I'm sure there will be more to come, we'll see kind of who that support solidifies behind, or, you know, who is able to galvanize some of that. But like you said, to this point, like a lot of Republican primary voters, myself included, the MAGA hat is staying on. We're not taking it off.
I mean, to your point, 47% in our poll did not choose Trump. So it's not to say this thing is fully locked up. Now, no one's going to ever believe that Trump is not going to win this unless his numbers drop below 50. So right now it is still his to lose, but there is an opening. This thing isn't, we are political strategists. We can predict the future. And that's why Chris is saying, and Michael's saying, it's likely going to be Trump. And obviously that's what the numbers tell us. But there are still several months for someone to come in here. And there's still a wide open lane. 47% still said that they'd rather have somebody other than the former president. And that by itself is significant. Imagine, look at Biden's numbers right now. 81% on the Democratic side are with him. Meanwhile, it's only 53 for Trump. Now, yes, he's not the sitting president, but 53 ain't 81. So there's still an opening here, but that door is starting to close. It's already, we're going into September here. There's not a lot of time for one of these candidates to prove that they've got what it takes.
I mean,
it'll be interesting.
Who you ask, he might still be the sitting president, and he's going to magically be whimmed back into office at some point. But yeah, I think the poll shows that, Trump's still in a really strong position. And the only world in which there is a path, to stop him from being the Republican nominee is if, people drop out fast. I mean, we can't be going into Super Tuesday with 5 candidates still in the race. It's got to be a one-on-one matchup. And, at that point, Trump's still probably going to be favored. You got to hope you can get, to a brokered convention. It's really Trump's to lose at this point, and DeSantis is faltering. So we'll see if, somebody can really come in there and actually make this a race.
Yeah, going with what you said, John, I think the real telltale sign, and we'll know pretty soon, is when candidates do drop out, are those voters going to be going to Trump, or are they going to be going to someone else? If they're going to Trump, I don't see any path. And I think we will know that in the next couple of months, that there is no path that Trump can lose this.
Well,
however,
DeRay, just real quick, that's a really solid point, and one that I talked about in my analysis on Live from the Lincoln Desk, because when you pull out that group that supported Trump at first and you ask who would they choose if Trump wasn't in, DeSantis dropped, Ramaswamy dropped. So that's the challenge here is, Trump's at 53, but that means he has to get 0% of the supporters for any of these other candidates. And what we're seeing right now is Trump supporters are a little bit down on DeSantis and Vivek because of the fact that they're looked at as the prime contenders to Trump. So your point is a pretty solid one, which is we're assuming that this 47% who doesn't want Trump stays not wanting Trump, but that's probably not accurate.
Yeah, and it'll just come out to turnout at that point, because I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that everyone who really wants Trump to be the nominee is going to get out and support Trump. So not only would those contenders need to get people on their side, but also get their people out to vote, because I don't care what people say, but Chris Christie isn't as compelling of a character if you support him as someone like a Trump. I wouldn't get off the beach to go support Christie, but maybe that's just me.
Off the beach? I don't know if any of us want to see Matt DeRay on the beach, but to prove your point,
you missed the joke.
I did get the joke, but I chose to scoop past it.
Okay.
To your point, though, we did ask just Trump and DeSantis, who would you support? And there, Trump got 62%. So he went up 9 points when it was a binary choice. So to your point, we're looking at 53 when it's a big field, but he gains 9 points when it's a one-on-one race. So you can't assume he just sticks at 53. Let's jump. I know you guys have thoughts on Trump. Let's talk about the Democratic side just for a second. And Chris, you're welcome to jump in. But on the Democratic side, we did have some fun. There were two questions that we asked that I thought were pretty interesting. So one on the Democrat side, one on the independent side. So we asked Democrats, who would you choose to support if Biden wasn't in the race? Kamala Harris got 28. And Lane will, by the way, Lane will bring these up on screen and post. So I'll mention to him when to bring it up earlier for the Republican numbers. But right now, Lane, bring up the Democratic numbers. So you see Harris there is at 28, Pritzker at 14. Then you got Sanders, Stacey Abrams at 9. So interesting to see some of those. And I was surprised to see Newsom all the way down at 5%, not even really breaking in like some of these others. So that was interesting to me. And then the other thing we asked is, Illinois residents, would you support J.B. Pritzker running for president? We said at some point. We didn't say this time, just said at some point. Democrats were all on board, 72-13, but independents were way against it. Only 15% supported, 60% opposed. So that tells you, we've talked about this a lot on these SFR episodes, as Pritzker runs further and further to the left to appease his base, maybe for a future presidential run, it's costing him the middle, which may make him vulnerable if he runs for re-election for governor. Certainly will make him vulnerable in a general election as he runs so far to the left. You're seeing independents in Illinois, moderate voters in Illinois are not super pleased with him. So I think it's something interesting to note that we saw in this survey.
I mean, I'm not surprised that Kamala was as high as she was, because, she's the vice president now. And most people view that kind of as like the default, like, option if the incumbent president chose not to run again, or those kind of things. Like, they're kind of seen as the backup. And obviously this is Pritzker's home turf, and people are very familiar with him, especially relative to how familiar they are with some of these other like potential contenders. So that's not surprising either. It was good, refreshing, and good to see that independents in Illinois are not high on him. And I think that is even like, it's evidence that like Pritzker is not as popular as he would like people to believe, or the fake news media like portrays him as. And there's openings there that we have to take advantage of. We can't just, like you said, you mentioned before, he gets a lot of free passes and people just seem to think that, oh, he's untouchable. Well, we can really clean his clock if we get our act together. So let's do it.
True. I mean, here's the thing that I would say about this. Everyone, when they talk about if Biden didn't run, it'd be Pritzker or Gavin Newsom. That's been the conversation in our circles, and we all just want to play and have some fun talking politics. But I don't see that in a survey. Harris, everyone assumes, even though she's in first in this poll, she's not going to be the person, because if you ask any Democrat, nobody actually likes Kamala Harris. So the assumption is it wouldn't end up being her. If that's the case, I actually see Newsom's not even a factor here. It's Stacey Abrams, especially when you dig deep in these numbers, because when you look at just female respondents on the Democratic side, Abrams was second behind Harris. When you look at Black respondents from the Democratic side, Abrams was second behind Harris. And females and Black voters, they are a significant chunk of the Democratic primary voting base. So I honestly, after this poll, I'm thinking if it's not Biden, it's actually Stacey Abrams.
If it's Stacey Abrams, then maybe we can indict her for being an election denier, since that's what we're doing now.
All right, let's come back to reality. Let's come back.
Let's let Chris talk. The poor guy's head's gonna explode.
Let's get out of fantasy land here for a second. Stacey Abrams is not going to be the Democratic nominee for president ever. I understand the point demographically, all that stuff, blah, 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 blah. She'll never be the Democratic nominee. It'll be a cold day in hell before somebody at the DNC lets the former minority leader of the Georgia House of Representatives be the nominee for president. That's just not going to happen. That's not going to happen.
I'd take a bet with you on that one, buddy.
So, and another thing, there are also some other candidates that would jump into this race that aren't included in this poll. Gretchen Whitmer wasn't included in this poll, and she's a darling amongst the Democratic Party, so she'd certainly be in the conversation of somebody who'd be able to pull some of that female vote.
No.
I don't.
No.
Yeah, Michigan. Yeah, the Michigan Republican in the corner is going to talk about that. Okay. Anywho, another thing we have to discuss here is that we talk about Republicans dating candidates, and in this context, it's 1% of people dating them because Trump's going to win. Guys, remember that. We're going to go back to that in a second. But Democrats do this more than anybody. They remember the clown car that was the 2020 Democratic primary field. You had them. They dated Buttigieg. They dated Warren. Sanders was in the lead. Everybody thought it was going to be Sanders before everybody got their stuff together and consolidated around Biden. Democrats fall in love way more than Republicans fall
That's
in love.
true. And that's what Pritzker's banking on, is that they don't have enough time to fall in love. Basically, if they're so desperate for a candidate because it's last second, Pritzker says, hey, I'm here, I'm progressive, and I got billions. That's what he's banking on. If they do have time to date, as you're talking about, you're right. They'll go through the field and they won't end up at Pritzker. So that's why it's Pritzker if there's no time. It's one of these other candidates if there is time. I'm just saying, based on demographics, I think Abrams would be the choice. But you can disagree with me. You like being wrong, and that's okay.
I like being wrong, Colin. You're the one who has you're the one who has faith that Donald Trump. You have to add disclaimers on everything you say so you can sleep at night that Donald Trump's not going to be the nominee. So don't tell me I like being wrong.
I like to live in my fantasy land. That's okay.
All right, and I'm going to live in reality here for a moment. And Donald Trump's going to be the nominee for president, and it's going to be Biden. And if it's not Biden, they're going to move Biden out of the way, and they're going to put J.B. Pritzker in there because of the reasons that you just mentioned of money, progressive, all this stuff.
We'll see. It'll be interesting to watch. All right, last thing I want to close on with this, which we talked about in the live, is just something. This backs up what we've been talking about, and I like that we have data, so you guys know we're not just spitting stuff out of our rear end. We've talked about how Trump is a little bit of a challenge, or a lot of bit of a challenge, depending on what district you're looking at the top of the ticket. And we have some data here from this poll that proves that point. When you look at, we tested Biden against Trump, and we tested Biden against DeSantis. We just wanted to see another name other than Trump, and DeSantis is still in second. What we saw is that DeSantis actually did 5 points better with independents, 5 points better with moderates, 7 points better with Hispanics. Overall, 2 points better, and 2 points isn't going to win you all these races. But when you see those key demographics that we need to win some of these tier 1 races, some of these suburban districts, these challenge districts, 5 to 7 points better at the top of the ticket with your key swing demographics is a big deal. And that's what we talk about when we say someone other than Trump at the top of the ticket helps us in Illinois. It's not because we either like or dislike Trump. You see, all of us have different opinions on Trump. It's that just we are political strategists, and the political strategy, there is data that backs this up. We aren't making this up. The strategy says that at least in this state, a different nominee at the top of the ticket will help us in these legislative districts, in these congressional districts, in these judicial and county districts. And we see it right here in the data. It's clear. So that's the last thing I wanted to go with. Anyone have any 20-second final thoughts?
All right, I'll be brief here. This is a poll taken in August. This would be assuming that DeSantis would have no campaign ran against him by Biden. Biden and the Democrats will run a campaign against DeSantis,
blah, blah, blah.
And that 2% gap is.
Chris, can you disagree with the point? Because the point is an obvious basic point. So can you at least admit you agree with the point, even if you want to quibble about the details?
No, I mean, I'm saying I disagree with
you. Do you think Trump at the top of the ticket is better for Republican candidates in the suburbs? Are you going to actually say that with a straight face?
I think it's a wash. It's going to be a wash.
You're absolutely 100% wrong. Everyone will tell you you're wrong.
All right. Well, if DeSantis won't be the nominee, so we'll never be able to tell if I'm right or wrong, will we?
I would just say that with those Trump numbers, those are pretty well baked in. There's not going to be a lot of movement there, but there is potential for the Democrats to run, billions of dollars in negative advertising about Ron DeSantis.
Yes, but his numbers are also soft on the other side. But you guys are only focusing on half the equation. His numbers are soft, both plus and minus. You looked at how many Republicans choose not to support Ron DeSantis when given a binary choice between Trump and DeSantis. That's also baked into here as Republicans who don't like DeSantis, who went to unsure or went to Biden because they said screw DeSantis. So his numbers in this poll are soft, both up and down. So you guys are choosing to ignore the larger point, which is the point I was trying to make. Also, you could get us lost in minutia that doesn't mean anything. The larger point, which everyone agrees with, is that Trump at the top of the ticket will hurt Republicans in Illinois down ballot. That is a established fact, no matter how much Chris wants to pretend like it's not true. All right, let's move to the next topic. Really briefly, let's talk about some other presidential campaign updates. I know some of you have heard about some updates on campaign operations are starting to take shape in Illinois. There's a reason for this. Petitions start getting passed for Illinois candidates next week. For presidential candidates, we're about a month and a week or so away from them passing petitions for delegates. So these campaign operations are starting to come into shape in Illinois. Let's briefly talk about what you guys are hearing there on the presidential state operations in Illinois.
So I've heard from surrogates who are supporting Tim Scott and DeSantis. They're really trying to get, that those lists of endorsements, those people, they're trying to get their people lined up, and they're using surrogates that are elected officials or influences the community. So I think, they see Trump's really popular here in Illinois, and they're trying to organize support behind some alternatives. That's really what
Well,
I've
you-
heard.
Well, you have to. I mean, people who don't understand Illinois law, the presidential race on the ballot in March means nothing. It doesn't matter who you vote for, who you don't vote for in the head-to-head. That is literally just a line on the ballot. It means nothing. What matters is who you select for delegate, which is right below that. And so if you want to actually get any electoral college, well, I guess it's not electoral college votes, it would be delegate votes out of the state of Illinois, you have to have delegates on the ballot. And to do that, they have to pass petitions. There is a process here that you have to go through if you want to actually get any delegates out of the state of Illinois, other than some of those super delegates. So you have to have a campaign apparatus in this state if you want to get anything out of Illinois. So that's, if people don't follow Illinois politics, don't realize that it's not, this isn't just automatically on the ballot because these candidates are running. They have to actually pass petitions in every single congressional district. So, all right, because of time, doesn't seem like anyone has any burning thoughts here, and we've only got about 10 minutes left. So, last thing, our buddy John Lopez passed this along to us. Apparently, Gary Rabine, former Illinois resident, now Florida resident, is hosting a fundraiser for Ron DeSantis in Florida. So, yet another Illinois resident who's hosting fundraisers in Florida for DeSantis. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Anyone have any thoughts on that, or am I the only one who finds that interesting?
You think it'd be
I
more
mean,
impactful for him to have a fundraiser for DeSantis in Illinois where he can bring those new contacts, whereas like having one in Florida for DeSantis, like it's kind of rehashing.
That's actually a good point. I mean,
already had access
Rabine
to.
does have a good number of contacts still in Illinois, especially up in McHenry County. You're right. If he hosted something there, I feel like he'd probably raise a lot more money for DeSantis. That's a great point.
I mean,
It's
aren't half the
interesting
Florida
because
residents
the,
former Illinois residents anyway? So I mean, maybe it's a new base of donors for
It does
DeSantis.
seem to be the rule. If you're an Illinois Republican donor, you just have to go to Florida.
Yeah,
I know the state party, they have a fundraiser in Florida every year from like all the people that have moved from here to there. So it's not it's not that unique, I guess, in that sense.
Hey, I give Gary a lot of credit. I mean, as someone who he's been involved, he's done fundraisers before, then he puts his name out on the line, runs for governor. He probably doesn't do as well as he thought he was going to. And instead of getting completely burnt out of politics, he's still willing to raise money for candidates. So I think I give him credit, even though we might disagree with the candidate or we might disagree with him moving to Florida, which I don't know how much I disagree on that. But I give him a lot of kudos for anyone willing to stay involved like that. So good for Gary.
Fair point. All right, let's do something. I don't know if I'm going to regret this, but we got a little bit of time left, and we're in episode 16, and we've never let Chris talk about Chicago, at least not since the early days. So for a few minutes,
oh boy.
let's cover a few Chicago topics, especially because there are some burning topics here. We're not going to get through all of these that we have in the list, but there's a few of these that have been in the news a lot over the last few weeks or even few months. So we're going to cover two of these for sure. Let's start here. Talking about the migrant crisis, because there is a lot of news about the migrant crisis. I know Chicago and Illinois have been begging for federal aid here. Pritzker and Johnson and a whole bunch of others just had a press conference. We're recording this on Thursday, just 24 hours ago, pushing Biden to allow for work permits for these migrants. So there's a lot here in the news. Chris, what are you hearing about this challenge here in the crisis?
So it's bad. No matter how bad you think it is on the news, it's worse. There are still migrants camped outside of Chicago Police Department, district offices. They're still camped outside of there. John Catanzaro, the president of the FOP, tried taking this issue to OSHA, didn't go anywhere. But it's still very, very bad. A few months ago, the city council, in their infinite wisdom, passed a ordinance that allowed for $51 million to go to getting migrants, necessary things they needed in the city of Chicago. Problem is, that was $51 million for a month, and the situation hasn't gotten any better. So they're trying to figure out how they're actually going to fix this problem, but it doesn't seem like they actually know what they actually devoted that money towards. Andre Vasquez is an alderman. He was put in charge of this whole operation of dealing with the migrant crisis. He was interviewed the other day, and the interviewer asked him, where's the money going? Guy had no idea. Guy had no idea where any of this money was going to help the migrant crisis. He had to ask the interviewer if she knew, and she did, because she already had all this information. As a good journalist did, she already had the information on hand, and she had to answer her own question, because these people have no idea what's going on with this migrant crisis. Wow. And there doesn't seem to be an end in sight right now.
Yeah, it is. I mean, no matter what you think about the political realities of that issue, these are human beings. These are real people. And when you see photos of what they're basically living through at this point, it's a bit heartbreaking, regardless of how you feel about the politics of it. All right, let's move to the next one.
Unwilling to cooperate with ICE. That would fix a lot of the problems.
And that's the other thing. I'll touch on this. Whether or not you believe in sanctuary cities is, whatever. That's on you. But here's the problem with the sanctuary city thing. Because you're going to say we're going to take in all these people and we're not talking about, someone's abuelo who didn't come here with a green card. We kind of looked the other way over it. We're not talking about those people. We're talking about busloads of people that just come to Chicago and we don't have any legal authority to send them back because we're a sanctuary city. We have to take them. So these are steps that the city never thought through because they wanted to pass an ordinance, some probably in good faith, that we're going to be a sanctuary city for undocumented immigrants. God bless them. But now we have no way of actually dealing with this problem, and the city's scrambling to deal with it.
I mean, they do cross pass. I will clarify. We're talking about migrants here. It is a slightly different designation than what it seems like Michael was bringing up. So, but the point is, you wanted the PR press hit for being a sanctuary city. You wanted that positive publicity. Well, now here's your chance to prove it. These are people who need help. And now you're saying, oh, we can't handle it. We can't deal with it. So which one is it? You don't get to take all the positive publicity for being a sanctuary city and then complain when you're actually forced to have to be a sanctuary city. So let's move to the next one, because we haven't talked about this since Chicago appointed a new police commissioner. So we'll let Chris report on a new police commissioner, even though it's old news. But I do want to say this is relevant because since our last recording, we were at the White Sox game on Friday night where there was a shooting. And I was there with my wife and Lane Davis, our producer. Chris was there with a buddy. And so we were at that game. And nobody knew. We had no idea what was going on. They didn't tell us what was happening. And apparently it happened in like the 4th or 5th inning. They decided it was still safe to continue the game, which, okay, even though we're finding out now the police wanted them to cancel and the White Sox didn't. It was safe enough to continue to play the game, but then there's supposed to be a concert after the game, which is the only reason people stayed, because the game was awful. It was against the A's and we were down by 8 runs. People would have left if we knew there was no concert, but the White Sox chose not to tell people they were canceling the concert. Now, we now know why they canceled the concert. We understand why they canceled the concert, and I actually agree. They needed the lights on. They needed to preserve the evidence. Okay, I get all that. Question for the White Sox is, why didn't you just tell everyone in the 5th inning then? Because everyone would have left, and now you could have started the investigation because no one wanted to stay for that damn game. But whatever, that's not the larger point. The larger point is that somehow a 26-year-old, very large woman snuck a gun into the stadium between the folds of her fat, and it wasn't caught, and then it accidentally went off and shot the leg of the person next to her. Is there not a more Chicago story than that? I mean, it is so unreal. And it's usually you hear these crazy stories, you think they're Florida. I feel like Chicago is taking over that designation with some of these ridiculously awful and stupid stories. So, Chris, that's my transition into Chicago crime. So tell us who the new police commissioner is, and are they going to do anything about these problems?
Well, first point, never compare to Illinois to the rat hole that is the state of Florida ever again.
I mean, we're begging for that comparison.
No, I never compare my beloved city of Chicago.
When you hear individual smuggles gun between folds of fat into stadium, before this week, I would have assumed that's Florida, and it was Chicago.
Understandably so, but Florida is not a good place. I do not recommend any human being ever travel there or live there. Anywho,
he's afraid of the sun. Chris is afraid of the sun.
I'm the darkest one in this podcast, Ray. I don't want to hear about I'm afraid of the sun.
Your lights are off. Your lights are off.
That may not be true, but the way that the cameras are, Chris looks like the whitest person of the group, the way the cameras are right now. So it's kind of funny to hear him say that.
In person, we'll compare arms.
Anyways, let's let Chris keep going on crime.
New police commissioner, Larry Snelling, which was a huge surprise for anybody who lives or works in the city of Chicago, because Larry Snelling was the police choice for the new police superintendent. This is a guy that the coppers wanted to be the next police commissioner. And Brandon Johnson chose him. Brandon Johnson chose the conservative, tough on crime choice for police commissioner, which was something that nobody saw coming. Whether or not Johnson's going to actually let him do his job is a completely another thing, but it's certainly a positive development from myself, who coming into the Johnson administration, thought that Brandon Johnson was going to back up that defund the police rhetoric, but he picked somebody very qualified position. God bless him. Now, on the other hand, going back to the Chicago White Sox stuff, when Brandon Johnson is asked questions regarding the shooting, or the new commissioner is asked questions regarding the shooting, it's nope, sorry, got nothing to say. On the I won't answer those questions. I think Johnson got mad at the reporter for even asking him that question the other day. I remember the night of the shooting that I was following it on Twitter, and they're like, oh, the police commissioner is going to be talking at 10:30. Oh, by the way, no, he's not. We'll talk to you about this tomorrow. So I don't know what's going on. At the very least, it appears like the new police commissioner is a good choice for the city of Chicago. Whether or not he'll be handcuffed by the administration is another question, but we'll see how it goes.
Well, and I tweeted as that was happening with the sentiment of everyone in our section. Obviously, we learned more details way after that. And of course, people like to respond 2 days later and go, didn't you know this? No, we didn't. That was the point. But Lane will bring it up. It's my first ever viral tweet. It got 1.2 million impressions, 400,000 views of the video that I took of the White Sox fans chanting, sell the team. I mean, people were ticked because they were given no information and basically forced to sit around for a game that no one wanted to sit around for. So people were unhappy, and it was a lack of communication that led to it. So anyways, let's stick on crime for our final topic. We're at an hour, but I need a second to rant since I let Chris talk about Chicago. We're on the topic of Chicago crime, and I've had in my list to rant about the fact that Illinois Democrats wanted to put together, and they voted to force car makers to pay to create a hotline that law enforcement could call to try to find vehicles that have been stolen. I was going to rant about that, and then they took it one step further. So Chicago is now suing two different automakers over the fact that they can't stop carjackers. Now, their point is a valid one, that these two automakers don't have the right things installed in their cars, so it does make them easier to be stolen. I respect the point. I get the point. But here's the headline that people are skipping past. Chicago is so bad at stopping crime and is so desperate to stop carjackers because they can't do their damn jobs that they're now suing the automakers because they can't stop criminals from stealing cars and carjacking cars. I mean, it's mind-blowing to me. I'm sure Chris is going to tell me I'm wrong on this, but at least the headline to me drives me crazy.
So I know a number of people in the Chicago Police Department, and what they tell me is that it doesn't seem like the auto manufacturers are being very, how do I put this, being helpful in this cause, where they'll say, can you please do this to these cars? They'll say, yes, we can. And then a month later, they'll say, actually, no, we are not going to do that, kick rocks. So
but why is it there? I mean, is it now Apple's job to make sure that none of their computers can be stolen from the Apple store? Is it Gucci's job to make sure that none of their products can be stolen from a Gucci retailer? I mean, this is what we're talking about here. Is you're not even going to dealerships saying dealerships need to do their job and not keep these cars from being stolen from the lots. They're saying after your product is bought, it's still your job to keep it from getting stolen because we can't do our jobs. And by the way, if you can't stop them from being stolen, we're going to sue you, even though it's not their job. They don't have police powers in the city of Chicago.
I think that it's more of like a recall, like class action type issue, probably, because
but they're suing, Michael. They're suing.
I know. Well, Kia and Hyundai know that they have these vulnerabilities in their cars and they're getting stolen left and right. You just go on TikTok and look up Kia boys, and you can watch video after video after video of people.
Listen, I get it.
I get it. On joyrides.
Okay, so it's. But here's what you got to take this to. You're saying that the liability is on Kia and Hyundai. You're not saying so Palatine gets to sue. I mean, I don't see these cars being stolen from Palatine. I don't see these cars being stolen from your community, Michael. Unless these cars are being,
but they're being stolen from my community, Colin.
They are,
right? So why is that the car dealer's problem and not actually the police who need to do their dang jobs? And by the way, I'm not blaming the police. I'm saying the lawmakers and the state's attorneys who aren't letting the police do their jobs.
Why can't we walk and chew gum at the same time here? Why can't we hold?
Because they're not walking. They're not walking at all. And
I'm not saying they're walking, Colin. I'm saying they should be walking. But you're questioning them doing anything positive here. Okay.
But they're not doing anything positive. They're not doing their job, and yet they want to blame the automakers. My point is, if they were doing their job and they were out there fighting this, and the state's attorneys were actually prosecuting this, and they were all doing their jobs, now go ahead and go sue. But you're saying we're not going to do our jobs. We're not going to prosecute criminals. But you know what? We want you to do our jobs for us.
No,
That's
you're
my
arguing,
point.
No. That's not your point, because you're arguing on
That is my point.
merit,
I know what my point
You're arguing
is.
the merit of the lawsuit. You're arguing that they shouldn't be sued at all. Even if they were doing their job, you would probably disagree.
But they're not doing their jobs, and that's why
But
I'm
if they
unhappy
were
with the
doing their
lawsuit.
job, Colin, if they were doing their job, and we actually had law and order in the city of Chicago like we should. Yes, but then
But
you're
that's not the
here
reality we
arguing.
live in today.
You're here arguing against the merits of the lawsuit itself. You're saying it's not the auto manufacturer's fault. It's not the auto manufacturer's fault.
It's not.
But, okay,
It's partially their fault, at least partially.
It is
No,
because,
so
because these cars are
There's no
vulnerable to being stolen.
All right,
and
let's
they
let
know it.
Chris, hold on. Let's let somebody else other than you speak. Oliver, go ahead.
So this is like saying like you're taking a diet supplement and you sue them because you're gaining weight, and then you're eating like 3 large cheese pizza every day. It's not the product's fault that you're gaining weight. It's the fact that you're eating poorly. This is exactly what you're saying. They're blaming one thing when the problem really lies somewhere else. Like,
Well, but they're not.
So you're saying like the only reason
Michael,
these
you're
cars are
defending
getting
Chicago.
stolen-
I just want to make sure I'm clear. You're defending Chicago, Michael.
Yes, I think I think that Kia and Hyundai need to be held accountable to some extent, because it's only happening at this rate with these two vehicles, and they know that there's vulnerabilities within the design, and that's why it's happening. That needs to be remedied in some way.
So
the leaders of Chicago also need to hold themselves accountable.
Hold on, Oliver. So downstate limited government Michael Butler is saying that it's okay to sue these automakers and have big government solution because of crime. Let's just make sure and be clear about what Michael Butler is saying right now. To his groupies who think Michael Butler is a limited government person, that's not what you're hearing out of his mouth right now.
But this is you again, Colin. Like you're advocating that limited government position, and you're on the merits of that lawsuit. You can't say that you're only arguing against it because the city of Chicago isn't doing their job.
I could live with a compromise if the other side is doing their job. I don't believe it should happen at all.
The thing is, though, it's
hold on. I'm not saying that I'd be against this if they were doing their jobs. I could live with a compromise. I don't think it's the right thing at all, but you're right. If we want to say it's a little bit on you, it's a little bit on you. Okay, but that's not happening. This side isn't doing anything. So why should this side have to compromise? Why should Kia and Hyundai have to do the job when this other side isn't doing the job? That's my point. I could live with a compromise, but this is like all the time we have to deal with liberals where they don't meet us in the middle. It's negotiating with terrorists. They want us to do it all, and they're not going to compromise even a little bit. And my point is, if these liberals want to compromise a little bit and say, you know what? You're right. We're not doing our job. So we're going to do X, Y, and Z to actually finally start to do our jobs on crime. But we're asking you to meet us halfway. All right, I get it. I'll happily live in the world of compromise, but that's not the world we live in right now. All right, we're late on time, and John was trying to jump in. John, did you have thoughts on this?
I thought it was just going to be, you live in rural Illinois like I do, and carjackings aren't a problem. That's just my easy solution to everything. So I leave my car unlocked at night.
Wow, I wouldn't say that.
Good to know. Good to know.
Good to know, John.
If you want to steal John's crummy car,
right?
it's free for you.
Lane will put the address up in post-production. He'll put the map up.
Yep.
Steal this man's car, yeah.
That's how Chris will win a political argument. He'll send somebody out to steal your car just to win a political argument, which actually I wouldn't put past Chris.
Then I'll try to get Chris with accessory to carjacking.
All right. All I'll say is this. I expected a little more support from everybody but Chris. I am shocked at Michael Butler for being a big government conservative. But I'm just giving him crap now.
It's the way of the future, Colin. It's the way of the future. That small government conservative is dead. Dead.
Oh, man.
No, there's both. The city of Chicago obviously is not doing their job when it comes to enforcing, the law and everything. That is true, but it is also true that Kia and Hyundai have like a known vulnerability that if they address would reduce the number
Michael.
of these.
You're giving no new information. You're just saying the same thing you already said twice. So if you got new information, jump in. But we're already 8 minutes over time, so I'm gonna shut us down here. All right, we had some fun. It was a fun discussion. Thank you, Chris. I think that's it. You're right. I think that's the last time we ever talk about Chicago, but maybe we'll see. I do appreciate our political team. Thank you guys for joining us. I'll see if I can go in a different order as I always do. So let's say Chris, Michael, John, Abby, Matt. Thank you guys for joining us. Thanks again to Lane Davis for all his work doing production. For those of you who have watched, You may have watched it on Friday or over the weekend or on Tuesday. We gave you a ton of information, so thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. We've got a lot more information coming out. We'll be back in your inboxes next week. Have a happy and safe Labor Day weekend. See you guys later.